Oh, good day there, and welcome to video 9, which is building future capabilities and strategy. This is the second to last video that you will watch, and it really gives you an idea of how to put the future strategy together. After this video, there's only one more that I want you to watch, which will give you some additional perspective as you develop this future strategy for your case study organization. So let's get into building future capabilities and strategy, video number 9. What will we deal with in this video? Well, we'll talk about how we move in general from capabilities to strategy. And I'll share with you the framework that I find quite useful for converting our thinking on capabilities from scenario planning into a playing to win strategy for the future. And that's really called the play to win strategy, or play to win framework. Then we'll actually begin assembling the various components of the play to win future strategy. And along the way, I'll share with you a case study example of a pharmaceutical company that we used when we applied this particular framework. Okay, so let's start off by showing you how you can use the information that you developed in your scenario planning exercise when you did the strengths and weaknesses and common and almost common capabilities analysis in the scenario planning exercise to the actual development of your future strategy. So this is where you ended off last time. You did the strengths and the weaknesses of your business idea, and you are in each of the scenarios, and you identified the strengths, the common weaknesses, and the almost common strengths and weaknesses, which is where some of your good ideas would come from across the 4 scenarios. And the idea there is that these then form the basis for your future strategy, because you've now shown that these are things which are key components. The strengths are your key kind of planks, and the weaknesses are things that you need to kind of enhance or change or add to or refine in order to build a set of capabilities that will allow you to compete across all the 4 scenarios for the future. And so now we begin to use this to assemble the future strategy. So we start off then by reviewing all the strengths and weaknesses, as we know, and also take into account what are the common strengths and weaknesses, because these are things we will need to take account of in any future. So if it's a strength in across all futures, then that's something we need to continue to invest in and perhaps improve and refine and build. And if it's a weakness across the various futures, then clearly we know this is a capability we need to enhance or change or get rid of from a weakness point of view. Change, get rid of the weakness, because we're going to need to do that under any of the futures. And that's why we call it the no regret bet. And finally, once you're looking at that particular little matrix with the scenarios and the strengths and weaknesses, identify the good ideas. These are things that may not be common across all the scenarios, but you may come up with 1 or 2 things that you think, gee, that's a good idea. And although the scenario, although it didn't show up as a weakness or a particular strength, this is something we really could add to enhance our overall strategy. Now, just a pointer on that, you may find that in one of the worst scenarios, what I often call the death scenario, which is a scenario where it's particularly unattractive for your business idea, that you're forced to think of something to do, some things to do in order to survive and thrive in that particular lousy scenario, that death scenario, that unattractive scenario. And you may think, well, you know what, this is such a good idea that we won't only do that in the worst case unattractive scenario, we'll do it across the board, because that is really a good idea. And this is often where we find major creative insights come from. New innovation comes from is thinking about how you will survive and how you will succeed in a very unattractive environment. That's often the spawning ground where great ideas come from. That's often the thing that really prompts you to come up with some really great ideas. So what we do then is we take this and we develop our strategy for the future by using a play to win framework. How do we do that? Well, it's almost as if we have this funnel and we pour three things into it. We pour the common strengths and weaknesses into it. We pour the almost common strengths and weaknesses, the things that might appear in, say, 3 of the 4 scenarios, and any good ideas which have emerged from the process. And these all then are funneled through into our strategy for the future using the play to win framework. So we gather up the strengths and weaknesses, the common strengths, almost common strengths and weaknesses, and the good ideas which have emerged from the exercise, and we use these as the foundation for putting together our strategy for the future. And we're going to use the play to win framework for doing that. So let's have a look at the play to win framework, which has got a number of components, five components. One is we start off by asking ourselves, what is our winning aspiration? What's our purpose? What are we trying to do in the future? So I'll share with you an example of how we work through each of these, plus a case study example to show you, how this can be done. So the first thing is, what is our purpose? What's our winning aspiration? What are we trying to achieve in the future? Secondly, where are we going to play? In which parts of the market are we planning to compete? So this is about saying, well, here's the section of the market. These are the segments. These are the needs. These are the jobs to be done. These are the kind of challenges we're going to help our customers, or the problems we're going to help our customers solve. And this is the value we're going to create. And then we ask a very important question, which is, how are we going to win? How will we achieve some form of competitive advantage in those markets to win? And secondly, what kind of capabilities do we need to put in place? What kind of things do we need to be good at in order to deliver this competitive advantage? And finally, then, what management systems might be needed and required to make this a total success? So let's examine each one of those 5 components, and I'll share with you a case study example of how we use this with a major global pharmaceutical company. So our case study example is a multinational pharmaceutical company operating across a number of different countries, and I'm looking at one particular country. They're a leading supplier of key devices for surgery, intensive care units, and general hospital consumables. As you can imagine, they were pretty busy during the COVID-19 crisis. They were looking to target growth in their major markets to really kind of improve their standing. And the case study example I'm going to show you follows a major scenario planning exercise which we did with them to understand the different scenarios that might unfold into the future. And you may be wondering whether COVID-19 was one of the things we anticipated. Well, just a quick aside on this one. We get somewhat annoyed when commentators and journalists talk about the COVID-19 pandemic as a black swan event. It was not a black swan. Black swan event is something which comes out of left field, which is completely unanticipated. Well, I think we've had plenty of examples of disruptions to global supply chains. And this is really what this has done from an economics perspective. It has disrupted our global supply chains, our ability to transfer people, our ability to transfer knowledge, and our ability to transfer products from different parts of the world because of the restrictions on travel. We've had a number of these cases. We've had Ebola, we've had SARS, we've had MERS. In fact, in 2015, Bill Gates, and you can Google this if you'd like to see it, warned that the next major disruption that we will face as a global community within each country, but across all countries, would be a threat of a pandemic such as COVID-19. So yes, we did anticipate a disruption. We didn't anticipate COVID-19, but we anticipated an event which would disrupt travel, transport, communication, sharing, and a general slowdown of economic activity. And one of the side effects, one of the side causes of this would be a major health catastrophe. So it's not a black swan event. Scenario planning, if it was done properly, if you really defined what your kind of business idea was and your focal question was, then you would have actually picked up something which allowed you to simulate this particular disruption. So we started off and we applied the play to win framework. And the first part of the playing to win framework is, in fact, what is our winning aspiration? What's the purpose of our business? And I think one of the things that, I'll share with you, it's not to make a profit. This is not the purpose of business. You may or may not have discussed this in other courses on your MBA or on any education that you've received, but the purpose of business is really more tied up with meeting a need of a customer in such a manner that it actually earns a revenue. And we had that discussion early on in the piece when we spoke about the business idea and the notion of sustainability of business. So the winning aspiration or overall purpose is usually expressed in terms of the business idea. What is the job to be done? And why are we here? What is it that we're trying to achieve for our customers? What problems are we trying to solve? What's the job that we're trying to do? So the case study example, and I can't go too much in detail because you'll be able to identify who the company is, but the winning aspiration was to profitably dominate our chosen micro segments of access, which is the procedure in an operation where you open up the patient and gain access to the particular organ or area of the body that needs to be explored or probed or operated on. Closure, which is what you do to close it up and secure the wound. Or cardiopulmonary, anything to do with the kind of circulation of blood through the body and the whole kind of cardio, the link with the heart and the veins and the arteries. And the aspiration was to identify and profitably dominate selected micro segments of general hospital suppliers. In other words, those segments which were being underserved, either because the competing companies were too large or because the size of the order for that particular hospital was not necessarily large enough. And to generally identify those underserved customer segments across all the business units in the company, because there was an understanding that as a major global player, one of the things you tended to do was to focus on volume. And we knew that the competitors in this market tended to serve the really big customers really well in the high volume items, but the smaller customers who didn't have the volumes and maybe some of the specialist segments weren't always well served. So the second part of the play to win framework is, where will we play? What are the major parts of the market or segments of the market in which we want to compete? Or what are the major jobs we want to focus on? So what are the specific value adding kind of jobs or problems we want to solve, the challenges that we want to help them meet? And we knew, for example, that in certain cases, the smaller hospitals weren't getting the service they needed. The smaller clinics didn't necessarily have the cash flow to kind of provide an adequate stock of these devices so that they were ready when they needed them. So in our example, we identified the segments we we're going to play in, and these were radiology, cardiology, cardiovascular. And the jobs that we needed to do were cardiac therapy, vascular therapy, easy to use consumables across a range of geographies, as you can see, and through a number of different channels. So that was our definition of where we will play. Now, the issue of how we will win, how we will achieve competitive advantage is a really interesting and important one. And I'm going to share with you a particular little framework we use within Play to Win to help us do this. Because we understand that how you achieve competitive advantage depends on how customers want their job to be done, and how we then use this knowledge to shape our strategy so we can actually meet this need. And I'm going to share with you a particular framework which is really part of some long-standing research that I've been involved in, and that is, what are the pathways or particular strategies that companies can adopt to develop competitive advantage? And what this did was it allowed us to explore the kinds of needs in very generic terms that customers had in marketplaces. So there were four categories. They wanted action and a sense of urgency, as they wanted you to respond very quickly. They wanted things that were cheap and reliable. They wanted you to show them empathy and strategic partnering, and they wanted innovation and flexibility. But here's the thing that's pretty important. You find that the diagonal combinations rarely exist in one particular segment. People either wanted fast or cheap or empathetically or innovatively. Because when you examine the strategies that match those, you have speed and focus, low cost and efficiency, customer intimacy, and novel and innovative solutions. Now, why do those four not combine well on a diagonal basis? Well, it's pretty simple. You can be fast, you can be cheap, you can be intimate, and you can be innovative. But you can't be fast and intimate. You can't, you may want to think about that, gentlemen. It's very hard to be fast and intimate at the same time. And you can be cheap, but you can't be cheap and innovative. So in a sense, the vertical and horizontal combinations will work: fast and low cost and intimate, intimate and innovative, innovative and fast. And we find similarly, those diagonal combinations do not exist. Or if they do, then you just find the customers using those terms, but what is actually driving their behavior is probably one or a vertical or horizontal combination of the two. So in a sense, how we will win then was really diagnosed from this particular company's point of view. We found that in cardiology, what they really wanted was customers to understand them and come up with innovative solutions for them. We found in radiology, they wanted a very similar combination. There's a great similarity between those two market segments. However, in cardiac surgery, this is where the surgeon actually really opens up the heart and conducts open heart surgery. Here, the issue is more about innovative but fast. So we found that this was a characteristic of the actual customers themselves, that they weren't interested in intimate relationships with you. They were quite arrogant and quite prima donna-ish. They really thought they knew everything, and so they simply said, this is what I want, and you give it to me now. I want it quickly, and I want it innovatively. Whereas in hospital consumers, supplying things like syringes and swabs, which are low cost and you need high volumes, they wanted cheap and reliable strategy, but they also wanted you to understand their needs so that you built a partnership with them so that when their stocks are running low, you never allowed them to run out of something, and you always kept the right combinations of things, and you understood the rhythms and the kind of patterns of demand, and the fact that Friday and Saturday and weekends was high demand for hospital consumables and so on. So you kind of think very carefully about how we will win in each market based on how their customer needs are in fact shaping up. The next thing is really to ask yourself, what are the capabilities that needed to support this competitive advantage? So the capabilities of the customer then, the capabilities of you as the company in your case study should really be, what key features does that business have? And what are the things they really need to be good at doing? And not surprisingly, this is closely linked to the strategy. So you can see that in each case, the type of strategy on the left-hand side is matched with the kind of organization and the kind of capabilities in the organization that is required. So let's have a look at the types of capabilities that exist in the organization. Top left-hand corner is a flat structure, high levels of empowerment. People are given broad job descriptions and really are able to respond at the level of contact with the customer to what the customer wants. The top right-hand corner, in order to have low cost and reliability, you really need very strict standards and operating procedures. You need key performance indicators which make sure that processes are followed in a very efficient way and a very efficiency-based culture. That's how you get low cost and reliability. In the bottom right-hand corner, if you want a customer intimate strategy, customer intimacy is that strategy in the bottom right-hand corner for customers who are looking for you to show empathy, then you need a team-based structure. Because a team-based structure is one that actually works on consensus, on participation. And that's exactly the way you need to operate with your customers. You need to operate in consensus and partnership with them and really make sure you have agreement and jointly develop new ideas. So in a sense, that's the culture you need inside the business. And that's the way you will then be able to develop your strategy and meet the needs of your customers. And finally, the bottom left is really the kind of strategy for novel and innovation and new products. And this is clearly where you need a sort of a capability that resembles more a research and development kind of operation, with a very fluid structure, high levels of individual accountability to a number of very brilliant, innovative entrepreneurial people, where innovation is the key part of the culture. So how did this translate then into the case study example? Well, the first thing we realized is that the different business units in the business, 3 business units, were quite different to each other because the customers and their needs were quite different. We've just shown in the earlier part that the customer needs across the different market segments were different. And so the business units were designed in such a way that they met the needs of the customers. So rather than thinking of the company as one business, we recognize the company is a portfolio, an umbrella of several businesses. 3, in fact, business unit 1, business unit 2, and business unit 3. And we know that each business unit has got its own style and unique strategy to serve its market. Because if your customer needs are different, your strategy needs to be different. And if your strategy needs to be different, you can't have a common way of operating across the whole business. Now, I know this is quite a revolutionary idea, and I don't want to get too kind of far into this because this is a whole new subject. But essentially what this company did is they gave away the idea of one size fits all. They said, well, we don't need to have a standard way of operating across all the business units. We don't need to have the same operating style or strategy across each business unit. So culture was not going to be the thing that bound those different business units together, but a common vision was. So this is a key distinction that they really made. And so they separated the business units, BU1, BU2, and BU3, from the shared services that existed at the top: strategy, ICT, customer, people, markets, Maori in New Zealand, finance and legal. Those were the shared services. And the second part of the capabilities they put in place was they made a clear distinction, and I sincerely hope that you've discussed this concept in your other courses on strategy, where they separated corporate strategy, which is the kind of portfolio strategy for the company, from business unit strategy, which is the strategy pursued by each business unit in the needs of meeting the needs of its customers, from corporate support strategy, which are functional strategies that they had at head office. So the capabilities then in place were separating corporate strategy from business unit strategy and having in place a shared service capability and abandoning the notion of one size fits all. And those were really important capabilities that they needed to put in place, which has effectively radically changed the way they think about their business and their company in terms of the way they're going to serve their markets. And then the last element of the play to win is, what management systems do we need? So what are the systems that could be needed to support the strategy, like information, the metrics, the KPIs, and the management processes? And, what kinds of things are we going to need to put in place to support this organization? And here what we did is we said, well, what we needed to do is to think quite carefully about the information architecture. So we'll have a common architecture, a common enterprise system across the business. But we are going to allow each business unit to have specific applications, specific apps, if you like, that meet their needs. So we weren't going to have a one-size-fits-all, which didn't really do a good job for any of them, except, of course, in things like payroll and so on, and leave records, which is fairly standard. But in terms of those systems which are related to serving the needs of a particular market, those have to be related to the strategy. And we adopted a business partner approach, which then meant that the corporate functions had a business partner which served each BU, each business unit, and made sure that what was delivered from the business unit was tailored to the needs of the particular business unit. And the business systems were designed to align very closely with the business unit purpose, rather than putting in place just standard corporate requirements. So one of the things that really kind of shook them up was in the HR area, where they'd always had a standard competency model across the whole company. And we found that the competencies, for example, in one business unit that were required in one business unit, while there would be some common ones across business unit 2 and 3, they weren't the same. Because if you want a business unit to have a specific strategy to serve its specific market, then you need to recognize that some of the competencies in that business unit are going to be quite different to perhaps the next business unit. They may share some competencies, but some of the skills that are required and competencies are going to be quite different. So in a sense, we realized that it was going to take a very different kind of way of organizing the systems and structure and capabilities of the organization in order to be able to do that. So your final task to assemble the scenario plan is, firstly, to identify the common or almost common strengths and weaknesses across the scenarios, plus any good ideas, and then take those and assemble your future strategy by using the play to win framework. So that really concludes the whole process of scenario planning. And there are one or two additional factors that you may find interesting to take into account, which is the subject of our next and last video in the series. I hope this has been useful. Thank you very much.